All right, we're up. This is the Our Town with Troy By, North Alabama's podcast. And I have another author in the studio today, Zach Taylor. How are you doing, Zach?
I'm doing fantastic. Just got done with another day of living in government land. So Here we are.
We're going to get to all that. You're a very intriguing guest because you offer a lot. I think there's a lot to the Zach Taylor package. And I was thinking today, it finally occurred to me there was a Zachary Taylor who was president of the United States.
That is correct. Same birthday.
Really?
Yeah.
Oh.
Yeah, and we're related, as a matter of fact.
Are you really?
It's a crazy story. Like, we didn't even think about the birthday until I was probably 10 years old, and we were got out. My grandparents always had the encyclopedias and National Geographics and things like that, and there was an episode or a volume about his theoretical poisoning, and we brought it out and looked at the birthday, and we were like, holy cow, you got the same birthday.
Wow.
Almost exactly 200 years apart. I think we're 198 years apart.
Just push it towards you just a little bit.
There we go.
Yeah. Did that have anything to do with your name?
Nothing at all.
No one did research to say, I wonder who was born on this day.
No, nobody did. Nobody did.
It's wild, though. So my hope for you is that you will live in infamy as the Zach Taylor.
I don't know about infamy, but, we'll see.
To be, singularly, like, I'm a big sports fan, right? So, like, they're talking about, like, Rory McIlroy, the golfer. Mm-hmm. Like, you hear Rory, and you just think,
that's
Rory
it.
McIlroy,
Yeah,
right? And Tiger, and Jack, and everybody, they can go by a singular name. Like, not Michael Jordan, Michael Jackson. There's some famous Michaels. But all right, so Zach Taylor's here. By day, he runs a fabrication facility at NASA, and but that's not right. He's really here, although it's exciting times at NASA.
Absolutely,
with Artemis 2 coming back safely, thank goodness. What were you? Were you born before? You were born in the 80s, right? Mid 80s?
82.
Okay. So let's see. I saw the Challenger explode live TV. I think it was 86.
86.
Yeah, I was in like 4th grade, and that was back in then they would haul the TV in, the teacher, and the whole school would pause everything they were doing, right, to watch, and we had seen tons of shuttle launches and successful landings and all that, and that was crazy as a 4th grader.
Yeah, absolutely.
To see that.
Yeah.
But thank goodness the crew is home, and I don't know if we'll dwell on that too much today, but just kind of painting the picture and providing the context of where we are. Just as a quick thing for me, I had 600,000 views on my YouTube channel today.
I saw that. That was incredible.
Yeah.
That's a milestone for sure.
A lot of it thanks to shorts and stuff, but as you know, there's a lot of work I put into this, and it's just me, just probably like it's just you in a way with the books that we'll talk about. And it's nice at times to see, like, whoa, kind of put things in perspective. Like, that's cool, and sometimes you have to toot your horn a little bit. But so Zach, as you see in the bottom right, has written a book called Rockstar Echoes. And it's the first of many. This isn't just something, I think, on the research I did on you, you always kind of had multiple books in mind. I believe. Sort of.
Yeah. So it evolved that way fairly quickly, right? So I started out with an idea, and the idea was to always keep it open-ended. So from that perspective, multiple books were always on the table. But, going into this as an indie author, there's not a lot of tutorials. Nobody's out there to help you. So you're kind of struggling. And I find I reached out on social media looking for a freelance editor. And I got a recommendation, and I sent my manuscript to them. And it was so interesting because, as an engineer, there's steps and kind of exactly what to do. And this was one where I didn't know. So I thought, we'll send it to her. And she came back pretty quickly and said, Zach, you don't have one book. You have 2 books here.
Okay.
And so there was a really clear delineation, a stopping point, right? So we cut the book off there, and she said, cut the fluff, fill this one, then you got your second book. And then, of course, she quickly left me. She was getting married and had a lot going on. But, so while she didn't help me finish the first book in terms of editing, she was the impetus for splitting it. And then after that, it just kind of kept spiraling, because as I filled it and built those characters and built the plot, I kind of realized quickly that this was a lot more than 1 book or 2 books or 3 or 4. It just kept growing.
Yeah. Let me do this from a bio perspective. You're born and raised Alabamian, right? Spent most of your time in Huntsville.
That's correct.
Graduated from UAH, mechanical engineering. You're married 21 years now, 3 children, 21, 17, 14, something like that?
Yeah.
We talked a little bit about, as you came in, you saw some of our cats, and you have some pets, some dogs and some cats. Kind of always had that. Let's see what else. You competed in bass fishing.
Yes,
so we
still
might
do.
talk about that.
Sure, absolutely. Yep, had a big tournament Saturday on Neely Henry Lake, the Alabama Bass Trail.
It was really cool when you said you 0.67 pounds from winning on Weiss Lake, right?
On Weiss Lake, yeah. I think it was 2021, and that I think everybody would agree, if you're in, especially when it comes to amateur team events, that the Alabama Bass Trail is probably the most prestigious team trail in America, which is a reason that people come from California, Arkansas, all over the country to come compete. And a lot of that's because it's a fantastic organization. It's really well run. But we have the very best bass lakes in America. You really can't find another state that has that kind of quality and fishes so differently than Alabama.
Yeah. Yeah, I've done a few episodes. One is, I think we have like 166 species of fish in our waters in North Alabama. And then when I interviewed Joel Lamp the first time, bass fishing is becoming more of a spectator, like a TV thing. And he was saying that they'll take like 600 hours of footage to then edit down to 2 or 3 hours for a tournament, right? And they're trying really hard to get more and more tournaments to come here. But like you said, it's just a great. And now Huntsville's large enough to house and to entertain and to feed all the competitors who come.
Yeah,
so exciting.
We were actually having this conversation. So we have a group of teams that we kind of travel together, good camaraderie, split the cost. When we first started out doing it was just me and my best friend Josh, and getting cheap hotel rooms and things like that. And thanks to the miracle of technology, we now have Verbo and things. So we can, rent houses on the lake and whatever. And we were having this discussion that it's so fascinating to us that essentially every lake that's near a major city, whether it's Neely Henry on Gadsden Lake or, Birmingham, Tuscaloosa, all of these cities have city venues. Guntersville obviously does, although that's been a fairly recent development. Huntsville does not. And Ditto Landing is finally moving towards really establishing a tourism capital and an on the water venue. So we're coming along on that.
Yeah. So, and again, somewhere along the way, you're an engineer, but I want to, and you're at NASA, and you're definitely going to be one that I want to come back because there's just a lot to unpack.
A lot to unpack.
But I definitely want to spend time on Rockstar Echoes.
Sure.
And and I think it's like any guest that I do research on. That like you kind of start out and thinking, okay, this will be kind of straightforward, and then the more you do and the more you listen to other interviews you've done, it's like, oh my gosh, like where do you start with this, right? And but I'd like to start first, I guess, with the you had 3 dreams that were the inspiration. I think of like the author of Twilight, I think it was, where she just kind of woke up in the middle of the night and started writing, and I can't remember if it was a matter of days before she wrote the book, and then they turned it into a movie type thing. So I kind of thought, that's never happened to me. I have all kinds of ideas and things, but for you, the first thing I'd like to ask before you go into talking about, or we can kind of rehash each of the dreams, was, did you dream about music or something, or did you go to a show the night before or something where, a lot of times you dream about things because something happened the day before, and then you're kind of like, why did I have that dream? Like, oh, that's right.
Well, in this case, it didn't, because this happened during COVID. And I actually kind of went the opposite direction of a lot of people. So I spent some of COVID working from home, like the vast majority of people in our country. And remote working was not working for me. I'm very much a boots on the ground and want to be involved. And I didn't feel that. Like a lot of people, I'm not going to lump myself in with musicians or true artists because I don't think I'm there yet. But, constantly moving towards something. And I didn't feel that way. So I actually changed careers in the middle of COVID to go back to work. This was a job where it was you had to be there in the facility to manufacture. And so I know that it wasn't a concert because there were no concerts at the time.
Okay. What did you leave? What were you doing? And then you left and went back into fabrication. Or
So I was still at NASA. I've been at NASA since I left UAH in 2008. I actually worked for 2 years at UAH for a support contract for NASA. And so I spent 13 years in non-destructive evaluation. So if you're not aware of what that is, you go to, if you're a woman, you go get a mammogram, once a year, or, you go to your proctologist if you're a man, or if you break a leg, right, you go get x-rays and ultrasounds. And so we do that on rocket parts at multiple steps. And so it's one way of when you're designing a rocket for maximum performance, that means you got to cut a lot of margins. There's no factors of safety. So how do you verify that the part that's been manufactured is exactly as you want it? Well, you use these techniques to evaluate, make sure there's no cracks, there's no manufacturing defects. That's the only way that you can get the performance out of the vehicle. Yeah. And so I came right into that, spent a lot of great years there. I was a certified level 3 in multiple different methods. And that job was fantastic because I got to see so many different parts of the space shuttle, and as we were working Constellation as well, which never did get built. But you see so much coming through that shop, so it gave me a great general knowledge. So that's what I spent the first couple of years. That's where I won my Silver Snoopy, or was awarded my Silver Snoopy in 2015.
And so for 1%. Right, that win the Silver Snoopy.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, and it was, that's a magnificent achievement. And I've said a lot of things to people that have asked me about that because while it is an individual award and it's incredibly prestigious, and the job, the reason that it was awarded me was certainly worth the effort and improving the safety for our astronauts. But at the same time, it was a team thing, right? I could not have done the work that I did without people from multiple different states and companies and people that I worked with, but they don't get that award. I got that award for leading those efforts. So to be honest with you, it's not a regret or anything like that. It's just I recognize that was more of a group achievement than it was a Zach Taylor achievement, but only one person gets on the wall, which shaped, I think, a lot of how I approach leadership in my current job.
Was there any animosity or any sort of negative feelings towards you? Did you sense anything?
Not at all. Specifically for the people that were directly responsible. And just to give you a little bit of a background on that, as we try to be more mindful of our environment, one of the things that we changed from Space Shuttle to Constellation and SLS with the solid rocket motors is the insulation that we use. And we got away from asbestos. Everybody knows about asbestos, but even those had asbestos in it as well. And we went to a new formulation. And during the development stage of the solid rocket motors, we discovered that they were producing propellant voids. And that's a very bad thing because they rapidly increase the surface area that can create an unsafe condition. And so we had to come up with ways to inspect these solid rocket motors in multiple different stages of their development to nail down when that was happening, because these are huge metal cases, and we had to get really creative. And it took, I worked, I think, in Utah where these are made. I had to spend 21 days straight, multiple different times, and I looked at it just as work, but there were sacrifices that were made, and those were acknowledged. So, but the workforce in Utah was incredible. I made sure that I gave them credit, but they gave that to the civil servant that was in charge of it. But I don't feel like there was any animosity there.
Is that up in Ogden? Where do they make those?
So
Hill Air Force Base?
Right. So Promontory Point. I'm sorry. So that's outside of Ogden. So way out.
Yeah. No, I was born in Salt Lake, and still have family there and stuff. So, but Ogden, that's Davis County, and I never really had any relatives there. So, I know where it is, driven through there, but I've been intrigued at times, like, I should go work out there at Hill Air Force Base or something, because there's always industry contractor jobs out there. All right. So, thanks for providing that context. And I think that this is an interesting town. You know how everybody has a story, and there's a part of me that would like to interview everybody that works on the Arsenal. It's like, so what do you do? And because national security and space exploration, there's just so many things that are very interesting. And I think that for younger folks, right, when they're looking at potential work options and career options, I think there's something really appealing about truly making a difference, right? Particularly if they get a chance to talk to somebody like you at a career day and find out all that working at NASA can provide, right? That's more than just the paycheck, more than just, there's something just inherently satisfying about it.
So yeah, I'd love to tag in right there because
Sure.
this is super important to me, right? So, in my job, we hire technicians, and most of those are going to be from surrounding areas of Huntsville, not typically in Huntsville, but as far as Arley or Coleman or even Gadsden. And when we hire those people in, most of the time, well, I shouldn't say most, but a lot of the time, it's just another job. They found an opportunity to make some more money. Everybody wants to look out for their family. And one of the things that I tell our technicians and certainly young engineers when we go to UAH and do career days is that spaceflight is something that gets in your blood, and once you experience it, it will not leave you. And so you said more than a paycheck, right? NASA is never a paycheck.
Mm-hmm.
I shouldn't say never. You should never say always and never. But for me, I didn't really have a choice because, my grandfather worked at Thicol for a while, and then my father worked at Thicol USA, and he's also a civil servant. He currently still works for NASA. So I was born into this. And to go back to your challenger, I was only 4 years old, 3.5, but I remember that day because my dad worked for Thicol. He worked on solid rocket motors.
Yeah.
And that was, man, you talk about like not knowing what was happening, but feeling it, right? And so growing up, Challenger, I was fascinated with Challenger and just fascinated with spaceflight. So it was always been in the blood.
Yeah.
So, like I said, we try to teach these people that like, this is not a paycheck, that this is a lifestyle.
Yeah. All right, let's, by the way, this is my big news is that I'm basically going to be doing without like I'll tell you afterwards like when we're off the air because I forgot to tell you before, but I'm basically going to be doing 2 shows now because I have to edit such because there's a particular platform that's going to start running it, which is cool.
Fantastic.
But I have to do a lot of I'll have like a less than an hour version, well like around an hour version of the show, and then there'll be the full show, of course, on my unedited, if you will, other than just stuff that. I guess sometimes we'll say, hey, can you take that part out? Or,
Sure.
we go to the restroom or something like that. So that's exciting. So I think for at least every guest that comes on for now and going forward, it's from a promotion standpoint or a reach standpoint, you'll hit some very different audiences,
right?
Which is exciting. So let's transition. Let's talk about, because I remember for the 2 of the 3 dreams. So the first dream is essentially, could you fill in for a front man that passes away or whatever the circumstance is? And, I'm with you. I love Stone Temple Pilots and Pearl Jam and Nirvana and just, Foo Fighters. Just so many great bands. Candlebox. You remember Candlebox?
I could talk. We have to touch on that in a little bit. Okay. Put a pin in that one.
Sure.
We're gonna come back.
We will. So you have this dream and you're like, well, it just kind of leaves you thinking like, could I, And then the next one relates to Kurt Cobain. Mm-hmm. Can you fill in that dream and then mention the third one? Because I forgot the details of the third.
Sure. Yeah. So obviously the grunge era in 90s were defined by Kurt Cobain and Nirvana. And that's that's not up for debate, right? We all agree to that. And whether or not that you love Nirvana or whether you believe that they were just a social media experiment or whatever, the reality is that Kurt Cobain was a massively influential character, despite the fact that there were bands that preceded Nirvana that were already going towards that, right? So Soundgarden had existed since like 86, right? Mm-hmm. And they're right there. And then we look at like bands like Jane's Addiction, which had yet to make it, right? Yeah. So like their first album had been out for 6 years before it took off, but it took Nevermind to do it. And we're all aware of like the story of Kurt Cobain's life with the addiction and things like that. And so in this dream, I go back in time and I wake up and I find myself being Kurt Cobain's best friend, but I have all the knowledge of where things are going to head. I know what happens to him. I know what happens to the 90s. I know the back end of the 90s. And I have to make this decision of, I can save my best friend. I can tell him where this ship is headed and we can turn it around now. Yeah. But if I do, there's no guarantee that his art will become what it will become. We'll never get it In Utero. We'll probably get Nevermind, which is important, but people don't realize how important In Utero also was. And so I had this moral dilemma on my hand of, do I save the man or do I save the culture? Because don't get Nirvana, you don't get Stone Temple Pilots, and you don't get so many of these other bands. And so I wrestled with it and ultimately decided that if Kurt never knew that I knew, would it change anything? would he want to just go live his life? And so I made the decision that I would say nothing but do the best I could to support him in his artistic journey.
Okay. And then what's the third dream?
This one's funny because I've told it several times, and my wife has kind of told me to tailor it specifically. Doesn't want to go into the details because it was a very interesting dream. So we love Incubus, right? It's our favorite band, and to be honest with you, I might have misspoke a little bit. I didn't go see a concert one night and wake up and decide on this. However, right before COVID shut us down, my wife took me for my birthday to watch Incubus at the Coca-Cola Roxy in Atlanta for the 20th anniversary of Make Yourself, which was their first big blow-up album. So that was on my mind because before that, we had Big Spring Jam, so a young teenager like myself could go get a yearly fill of music in 3 days. So I had no interest in going to see live music. My wife drugged me to this, and that changed my perspective because you have that, and then you have COVID, and so you discover this new love or this old love, and then it's gone. All right, so I'll get back on the topic. In this dream, we go to see Incubus play, and after the show, we go back to our hotel, and we go get a drink, right? Hey, let's have a little nightcap, whatever, and man comes over my shoulder, and I turn around, and it's Brandon Boyd, the lead singer for Incubus. And sparing you the details, or sparing my wife the details, my wife runs off with Brandon Boyd.
Okay, right.
And I'm left at the bar because this isn't like she packed her stuff in the middle of the night. She left. She leaves right then. And I'm left with this weird moral dilemma of, well, can I blame her? Right? He's rich. He's incredibly good looking. He's sexy. I mean, this is one of those guys that never performs with his shirt on. Famously, he'll tell you that in any podcast that you watch. So, and I'm not the singer that he is, and I'm not the artist that he is. I offer my wife nothing other than 20 years of marriage that we've had. And can I honestly say that I've been the absolute best husband to compete with Brandon Boyd? And the answer was no. And so the end of that dream was just kind of coming to the realization of, well, that just happened and there's not much I can do about it. And should I do anything about it?
Okay. So with the culmination of these three dreams, you kind of launch into like, hey, I think I want to write a book. You mentioned earlier how your first draft, if you will, went to this editor. And I think someone's described, it's kind of a book within a book. Mm-hmm. There's kind of a nonfiction element within the fiction element of it. But at the end of the day, the main character is this Lloyd Brandon. Mm-hmm. Well, the character that starts everyth's off, and he passes away. He's the front man for a band called Aberdeen. Mm-hmm. First question, because I don't really know as Aberdeen Proving Grounds in Maryland. What's the significance of that name, Aberdeen?
So Aberdeen is where Nirvana were from. That's where they formed.
In Washington.
Okay. State. Yep.
I should have known that. That's a part of, I guess, my music trivia that I never glommed onto.
Well, but here, I love we're already going because you're already doing what I've always wanted a podcaster to do for me, is start asking these little Easter egg questions. Yeah. So fantastic.
It's funny because I always have to remember there's two things that I struggle with as a host. One is I have dove into learning everything I can, and then I make this assumption that every listener or viewer of this has somehow also done that. Mm-hmm. And so I do my best to summarize things, but sometimes I come from this perspective of, well, they'll already have known that too, and we don't necessarily need to fill it in. But at the same time, for sake of time, I don't want you necessarily to kind of rehash everything, okay. Right? Because I would say, hey, go listen to other interviews and support Joe Martin, for example, Huntsville Hustle, and some others that you've done.
Yep.
But then I also, when I was I went to community college for 2 years, and I transferred to a 4-year school in Virginia. And surprisingly to me, even though I was a management information systems major, one of the most impactful classes I ever took was a literature class. Mm-hmm. And for the first time I had this instructor, and there was 40 kids who started the class, and his whole goal was to get it down to less than 10. And within 3 weeks, there was 9 kids in the class because he just made it really hard. We had to read 2 books a week, and he was loving watching all of us drop like flies. But I hung on. I was working full time, going to school full time. I got a family, and it was killer. But then the class got easy, and then he really just kind of taught us to appreciate what a storyteller's trying to do, and why they choose names, and there's symbolism and foreshadowing, all this kind of stuff. So if you're a author, I like to ask. So you have Lloyd Brandon. Mm-hmm. Where did that name came from?
Well, I've already said his name once today, but fascination with Brandon Boyd. So so this is a exclusive for you because you're the first that asked the question. So that was something I've been holding on to for a long time. Was where did that name come from?
You just kind of played off of each one of those.
Flop some letters.
I was kind of thinking it'd be like one of those movies where it's like an anagram, and it's like what is the password? It's like National Treasure. Where they figure out Valley Forge is like, there's something like there's something in Lloyd Brandon. Okay. Then, so he dies, and then, Klein, right? Klein Thomas, he, succeeds him. And then the struggle is everyone wants him to be Lloyd Brandon, but he'd like to be Klein Thomas. And I kind of think of AC/DC with Bon Scott, right? And then, that whole situation, which is amazing because then Back in Black is like probably still one of the highest selling albums of all time. And is it Angus? Right? He came in, and with 6 months they turned down. Is it Angus or was
Brian?
it?
No, Brian. What is it?
Oh yeah, name? Yeah, you're right. Brian. Can't remember his last name either. But like, how amazing is that? I was thinking when I was kind of hearing the setup of this, I'm like, this is kind of like that situation where can this replacement come in? Brian, it's right there, replace Bon Scott, and then boom, they've just been massively successful, right? As a band.
So to that end, so that's your 70s and 80s version, of course. Foreigner has dealt with this as well, but for my generation in particular, although we're kind of the same generation, the fascination really came from Alice in Chains, right? So Lane Staley, which again, we can. Looking at Klein Thomas's name, we'll circle back to that if you like on where that name came from. But William Duvall replaces Lane Staley, and then same time Scott Weiland dies, and Jeff Goot is now fronting him. And having seen both of those bands multiple times, but
for Stone Temple Pilots,
and having not seen either one of those bands with their original lineup, as much as I loved them, I just didn't have access to that. And so all I know from a live perspective is William Duvall, Alice in Chains, and Jeff Goot from Stone Temple Pilots. And I was always fascinated with listening to fans or reading on Reddit their comments. And one thing popped out was that no matter how good those replacements are, they're held to an unrealistic standard, a standard that they will never live up to, even if they're a better artist, right? So Lane and Scott famously struggled with heroin addiction and all those kind of things. And William Duvall's not, and Jeff Goot has not. They stayed out of trouble, and yet, they're just judged completely different. And so I was fascinated with that, the dichotomy of that, and what their lives must be like.
What about like Sammy Hagar stepping into Van Halen, even though the singer doesn't pass away?
So from my perspective, I'm actually more of a Sammy Hagar with Van Halen than I am David Lee Roth. And I know that's sacrilege to a lot of people, but Sammy brought something extra that was undeniable in my opinion, right? So if you ever listen to, the isolated tracks of David Lee Roth, he's a great front man and entertainer. He's not a good singer, right? But Eddie being who he is and the band being so awesome, they kind of covered for that. Now you introduce somebody that had really nothing to prove, right? He comes in, Sammy's guitar is almost unparalleled and his vocals are unparalleled. So to me, that created an even bigger band. But I understand, because I didn't live through that, right? But I understand why people split over that.
Yeah. All right. So Klein Thomas, ultimately, he gets so frustrated at the expectation that people have for him, and they're playing a show, and he just flicks off the band, right, and just leaves and just quits. So before you kind of launch it more, that name, Klein Thomas, where does that come from?
So Scott Weiland's name is actually Scott Weiland Klein, and Lane Thomas Staley.
Okay. This is deep, man. I like this.
A lot of it.
So how did it take you more time to think of character names and kind of where you wanted to go with the overall stories, and how difficult of a process was that for you?
Yeah, it really was quite challenging. In fact, we were going to go with Klein's name being Lane. It was Lane in the entire first draft.
Thomas?
Yes. So the problem with that, my wife hated it. It was too direct, right? It was something that it was just too on the nose. And especially if you pair it with the names of other people in and of themselves without doing any research, they look fairly innocuous. But once you figure out the pattern, it's great. But the way we originally wrote it, it was just way too on the nose.
Too much of a direct reference to that person. Okay, so then the Rockstar Echoes, and there's going to be Rockstar Mirrors and going to be other books, but the Echoes really is kind of that going away from being, if you're Klein, you don't want your voice in the Echo to be that of Lloyd, right? That's kind of getting at the meaning.
Yeah. So if once you read this, you discover that Klein has a lot of self-worth issues to begin with, right? And as he joins this band, it becomes very complicated quickly. So like my dream about joining a frontman or being a frontman, getting pulled on stage, that's like the moment that the hand is extended to you. It's, oh my God, the hand is being extended. Of course I'm going to take it. Yeah. But it's not until you're on stage and you're facing the crowd that you realize, wait a minute, this is a lot more complicated than I thought. So in Klein's perspective, I need a change in life. I had this gift and I'm going to seize it. Right. And from the very beginning, it becomes obvious to him that all he is an echo of a dead man. Yeah. Because right or wrong, his self-worth is based on, I do not look like Lloyd Brannon at all. I'm the most, and he has a lot of similarities to me in some respects. I'm not a looker. I look nothing like him. I'm never going to be this idol. All I am is a voice, and that is all my worth is.
And this is kind of a reference to you as an individual, right?
Yeah. So I think I made a little bit of the mistake that if I were an educated writer and I decided to go to school or whatever and develop my task or my skills instead of just launching into a book, because that's very much Zach Taylor, is just like, let's dive into something head first. Sure. They would tell me that you try not to base your characters on yourself, for sure. And if you're going to base your minor characters on friends and family, they need to be very generic. And I didn't take that path. I wanted to speak from something that I knew. I wanted it to because this book is about grief and ambition in particular, and so much more generational struggle. All the things that I wanted to say to the world, and I could do that from this book. So I channeled a lot of that feeling and created a character. Although, I don't suffer from any addiction or self-worth. I have great self-worth, and that's because friends and family and career and all that kind of stuff. But I wanted to create a character that was both. You wanted to root for him, but then you wanted to just kick his rear end because he just couldn't get out of his own way. It was something I know very much about.
Yeah. Yeah, I guess it wasn't necessarily self-worth as much as, and I know this, there's elements of society that get pulled out in this as far as this idea that, and I think you talk about your generation. I think I'm on the older end of that maybe, but it kind of like, hey, you can be anything you want to be. Not exactly. I am never going to be the quarterback of the New England Patriots or any NFL team or any Division I college team. So don't tell me that I can do anything. There are caveats there. Yeah, if I work hard, I can do a lot of things, but I can't just do anything.
Right. And it all comes at a cost, right? Yeah. So, this is a very real thing to me, right? So, again, for me, it was I can completely identify with wanting to be a quarterback because I was a quarterback in high school and and had some opportunities, but being 5'3", the one thing that I could not control was my genetics, right? Yeah. Everything else, the work ethic, the knowledge and the training and the preparation and all that kind of stuff. And of course I played several different positions, but I couldn't help that. Where I really come from is that, we're supposed to be in the highest earning portions of our career right now. Right. And yet we've spent our entire careers in the most volatile economic crisis, essentially. Yeah. I wouldn't call it a crisis. I don't want to sound crass about it, but it's definitely volatile. There's been the least amount of economic growth than any other generation that preceded us. And yet if you look at the metrics, we are incredibly hardworking, incredibly ambitious, and incredibly educated. And what has it led to, right? For the vast majority of us, we're just stuck in the same place perhaps our parents are. In fact, we're probably worse off in many cases than our parents were at similar times in their lives.
Yeah. Yeah. And I certainly, I've been talking a lot of episodes lately about kind of those chips I have on my shoulder, but I yes, I've had a good career, but I didn't ask enough questions, and I don't know if I got enough guidance to potentially have put me on a different path that might lead to like a guaranteed retirement, where I worked really hard, worked at the CIA for 20 years as a contractor. But guess what? Like, people don't look too fondly on contractors, yet you work your butt off. You're working more than your government counterparts, and you don't get an award for anything. You know, you get a long commute, you get a lot of hours, and you get blamed for everything, and they'll fire you, you know, that day. So, yeah, I mean, you get paid more because there's a risk.
Right. Risk is always involved.
Yet, though, now I'm at that age where friends are retiring from this and that, and I'm like, I have like, and or they get let go before they get a pension by some company at 20 years. Like, sorry, we're going to let you go just shy of 20 years, or just shy of when you're going to potentially earn a pension. So there is nothing other than paying in your own, you know, into your own 401ks and things like that, which is frustrating in a way, because I know a lot of people who haven't really worked that hard in their career, barely can get in 40 hours, and they're going to, you know, I'm going to retire. Like, okay.
Yeah. You know, they say comparison is the thief of joy, but you have to look around you sometime. And so that, you know, that's something that I've really struggled with, is that, you know, my grandfather, growing up, spent a lot of time with me, talking money management, talking investments from a very, very early age. And so I was not ignorant when I was picking a career path. In fact, you know, we brought out a chart that said, my granddad said, okay, what we're going to do is we're going to look at one line that says the highest demanding job on the market, and where the line across for the highest salary out of college, where that meets is where you're going to be. Mechanical engineering. Okay, let's do that. And so, you know, he always coached me on how to save money and how to invest, and, you know, all these little things. And so, you know, I had a pretty good idea in 2008 about where I would be in 2026. And we're not there. And it wasn't because Zach made terrible financial decisions by any stretch of the imagination.
Yeah.
I was supposed to have a beach house by now. I was supposed to have this and that. And I don't have any of those things. And I have a chip on my shoulder about that, for sure.
Okay. Good. I figured we could relate to that to some degree. All right. So let's move. Let's finish out the characters, and we'll go from there. But so Rain Harlow is so this is where there's a nice, well, this is the contrast between Klein taking over a successful band, right? Trying to, you know, put his own stamp on that. Ultimately, he leaves, versus her, where she's starting it her own thing, right? Trying to get that going. So can you talk about in the book how Klein and Rain meet, and, you know, the significance of her character?
Yeah. So,
and or where the name came from?
Sure. So, you know, Rain is not, unlike most of the characters, she's not a musical reference. But what do queens do? They reign, right? And she is the front woman for the Painted Queens. And so that was just kind of, and I've always kind of loved that name for some reason.
Cool name.
So yeah, it's a cool name. It's a rocker name, you know?
Yeah, I mean, it's just Rain is Rayne.
That's right.
Okay.
So she was created, and again, I don't want to rehash anything I've said before, but she was created to initially be just somebody that he could talk to, because writing for me, I'm very much conversational in this book. What you're going to learn is, like, my dialogue is my strength, right? It's very natural, flowing. You get very unique personality. So I needed somebody for Klein to talk to about his problems, because initially these books were going to be about him. And so she became a waitress at a bar. Okay. And then the more I developed her character, the more that became, okay, well, maybe she could be a love interest, right? He's going to need a love interest when he's in LA. And that could be an interesting dynamic, because she's significantly, you know, younger than him, and she's uniquely beautiful, something that Klein probably couldn't pull by himself. Okay. Well, let's pull on that string a little bit. How could Klein Thomas, who nobody knows, pull a woman like Rain Harlow? Well, what if she knows who he is? What if she wants to manipulate him for some ends? Well, what would those ends be? Well, what if she is in a band that is struggling and needs a break, and they see an opportunity? So that's how that evolution became. And throughout writing this book, the more I wrote it, the more I started stumbling across what I would call as a social platform. It doesn't belong to me, but I became aware of it very quickly as I did research on all female bands in particular, and female rock stars. So that's where she came from.
Right. Yeah. And then just the lack of, I'm trying to figure out how to, like, those who really make it, right? Or why do they get overlooked in rock and roll versus maybe some other genres and pop and other things?
Sure.
Right?
Yeah. And, you know, that's a hard industry. And one of the first questions that came out of this when I began writing the backstory for the Painted Queens and adding them in is, why aren't they famous, right? So why wouldn't they be if they're as talented as I say they are? And the first thing that popped in my mind, because I was really trying, honestly, and I get asked this a good bit about how does it feel to try to put yourself in a woman's shoes when you're not a woman?
Yeah.
And one of the things that I stumbled across was, why don't I like women in rock and roll? Because I inherently don't like them. I don't like them. I respect them, but like if I'm going to choose, say, Black Sabbath, or if I'm going to choose Heart, I'm going to choose Black Sabbath every time. I love Barracuda and I love a lot of their songs, but that's not on my playlist, right?
Yeah.
So then I started flirting with this idea of perhaps male gaze is a real thing in music, where we like to consume it with our eyes, but I think we're jaded, or at least we perhaps are built to not like that. And why? But then I started pulling that string. Why don't I?
Yeah, I'm trying to think of. There's this one female band that was in. You know how they started being featured in video games. Mm-hmm. And I don't play video games like I used to. Like there was one period of time, even when I was married, that I had like a Xbox or something, and I was playing like racing games. Mm-hmm. And Burnout was one. And it's funny because like the DJ that they used, this is like way before AI. Yep. That guy's actually gone on to be very famous, like on XM radio and stuff like that. But I remember like he was this DJ, and he's like, in this game, and as you drive, right, they're kind of changing the songs. And I'll have to look it up. And I'm like, that's a really good band. It's like one of the few all female bands. I was like, I like these songs, man.
I wonder
these are good.
I want to say like maybe it was a Need for Speed that had Veruca Salt perhaps in it. So not that might not have been it, but no. Yeah.
I'll have to look it up later. And so she's a single mom, mm-hmm. right? And there's those struggles, like you were saying, as far as how do you relate? How does a man relate to that?
Right.
Right. All right. Now, and then you have Clara Cowley.
Mm-hmm. So Clara, you hinted at this book within a book, right? So this was an idea that I did not begin with. When I sat down, this was going to be a third person omniscient and just go, right? Mm-hmm. And it was always go. At first, it was going to be just Klein. It was just Klein from the very beginning to the very end. And then we split it, and, Rain became popular. But I was sitting on my back porch one day, and one of the things that I was struggling with my writing was that I could not convey what characters were feeling or what they meant without outright telling the readers. And if I had to tell the readers, that's not good writing. And so I not that I stole this from Daisy Jones and the Six, because I actually began writing before that show came out, and I still to this day haven't read Taylor Jenkins read Daisy Jones. But if you're aware, that is a documentary essentially. Mm-hmm. And there just kind of something clicked on me. It was like, that's why they did that, right? Now, I wanted to be different about it. And I don't like borrowing or stealing ideas by any stretch of the imagination. So I wanted to do something unique, even though that played kind of a small part in that book. And I said, well, this is my way of explaining things to my readers about, well, that was what was said, but that's not what was meant. This is something that happened off the page that you didn't see that was important. But it also gave me the most important thing, and one of the main reasons I created it was, it's been interesting because a lot of readers have kind of dinged me because there's a lot of things that Clara says within Echoes that are not answered in Echoes, about a lot of things that Clara says in her excerpts in Echoes that are not explained and don't come to fruition. And that's because this was a fantastic way of setting the scene for future books.
Yeah.
Right.
Okay. And so she is an observer. Like how else would you describe her? Not a reporter or anything like that.
So her backstory is that, she grows up in the Washington era during the scene, right? During the grunge scene. And so she's a young teenage girl experiencing the off ramp and the Olympia and all these other fascinating venues with these fascinating bands. And she's looking forward to becoming a journalist one day when she grows up so that she can experience this. Right. But by the time she goes to college and she graduates and all this other kind of thing, the music industry kind of turns on its head. Right. So we get kind of the mid to late 90s, college rock kind of thing. And then we get new metal in the late 90s. And from her perspective, we've entered this kind of, the Dead Sea, right? So she's super jaded about this. I wanted that breakthrough in music. I spent my whole life preparing for it, and it never came. So she's a music journalist in LA. She's just covering local bands, she's written a couple of books and so she's well liked. And so she gets hired to cover this emerging story. Although at the time they don't know where it's going to end. And you're not going to know in Echoes, you're not going to know for a long time. So her job was to be hired by the manager and by the Lloyd Brandon Foundation in particular to catalog the events. And it's a money grab at the time. They think, if Klein, this new singer, if he fails, well, it'll make for a good story that we can capitalize on. Well, wouldn't you know it, Claire is getting her opportunity now to catalog and follow this amazing story that's going to span at least one generation.
Yeah. And her name, where does it come from?
So Clara comes from clairvoyant, and that's referenced within Echoes. And Callie just felt right? CC just kind of felt like it rolled off the tongue. But Clara definitely came from clairvoyant, right? So she is the person. She's your looking glass, so to speak. She filters all the data. She sees everything that happens. And the beauty of that, of course, is the way that I love to write is that it's actually kind of a double-edged sword. Yes, she was there. Yes, she sees everything, but she's sometimes flawed. So you can't quite trust her. She's not really clairvoyant, but she is in her own mind.
So Callie's just kind of a name you just tagged on. Mm-hmm. You know somebody with that last name?
No, I don't. I honestly don't know where it came from, and not to be maybe crass about it, but when I was describing her physical appearance and what she looks like, that's kind of where that came from, and it just kind of fit.
Okay. What other characters in the book would you like to highlight? Do you think would be important for?
I think, I've told people that Ava, I think, is my most fascinating character, and I don't really want to get into a lot of the social agenda on it, but I was fascinated in creating a character that was so unlike myself. I feel, this is Zach's opinion, don't take it as fact, but I feel like being myself, both being in stature and my race and my gender in particular, that I'm easy to dismiss, right? So I wanted to create a character that you simply could not do that with. And I wanted to create a completely complex character that other people could totally relate to, right? So enter Ava, right? So she plays basketball for UCLA. She gets the opportunity to play in the WNBA. She's over 6 foot tall. She's a muscular goddess. She's just gorgeous, and she's a lesbian. She is has a little bit of I forget what the word that I'm looking at. She's not psychotic. What's the word that I'm looking for? Anyway.
Egomaniac? No. I can't think of it.
Well, so I'll describe it, right? So she's does not think of other people's feelings. She says what she feels and what she sees, and it doesn't occur to her that might hurt feelings. So I wanted a character that could sit in a room and literally nobody could debate her. So you're a man and you want to come in and talk about me being lesbian. I don't care. I don't really care what you think. So you want to come in and you want to tell me I'm a bad musician. Well, I'm a great musician. I don't care. You want to come in and you want to talk to me that like I'm not physically imposing. I don't care because I am, right? So she kind of became like this perfect character, a sounding board, because when she speaks, you can't debate what she's saying. So she kind of goes, she's your center, right? Your sounding board, I guess I would say.
Yeah. I might know some people like that, and you're wondering how much of it is trained and versus that's just, it is most of their DNA, which is like, wow.
Interestingly enough, at one of the events that I hosted, well, I was participating in, it was hosted by a local bookstore. This question was asked.
The Blue Apple?
Yeah, it was not at Blue Apple. It was actually at Court Street in Florence. I call that local because, I travel for bass fishing. And it was funny because they asked me how I felt about writing a lesbian character when I'm not one, and obviously a woman when you're not one. And I said that for me, it was really a big struggle because I wanted to get it right, because my heart is absolutely in the right place, because I love and respect all people regardless of anything, right? They're people, they have their own identities and all that kind of stuff. And then they asked me, like, what was she like? And because they hadn't read the book yet. And I told them, and it was so funny because it was a lesbian couple that was in the room, and they said, you just described lesbians perfectly. And
Wow.
I said, I can't ask for, a better endorsement than that. So I was so worried about that, though. And I still, to this day, I worry about that on, like, and what I always tell people is right, wrong, and different, whether I'm describing, Marcus, or I'm describing Aisha, or I'm describing Ava or Rain or whomever, and they are very diverse. My character cast is very diverse, and I never lived any of that, right? We all say we have friends like that or whatever, but my intent, and what I tell people is, at the end of the day, my intent was to be honest. And represent people as best I could, represent the good things and all.
Yeah. Was it hard for you to, I think you're a little bit like me, maybe, where, kind of grew up and worry a little too much what people think, right? And at some point you just not necessarily get over it. Maybe it depends on what part of life. But when you are launching into being an author, when you're going into like the music industry, is it hard to kind of just say, you know what, I'm going to do it, and there's going to be some critics, and so be it? You kind of just touched on it. I'm doing what I can from what I feel. I feel like a lot of my life is, and it's rightfully so, if observation, things that I, like, this isn't a political show, but I look at just kind of life and the way I've led my life, and kind of right and wrong, and doesn't matter what party, of just kind of like what makes sense to me.
Mm-hmm. Yes.
And
so go ahead.
how difficult is it to say, you know what, I don't care. I'm going to do this, and I've got all these books in mind, and someone who's really proficient in the music industry can push back, or character development push back, and it doesn't matter. So
they absolutely they've done that, right? And so one of the things that I did in writing this book was that, since I didn't know, I did what I know that I do in industry, is when you don't know how to do something, you go out and get experts, right? So I needed help with publicity and things like that. And so I hired a publicist, and one of the first things he said was, 90% of people are going to hate your work if they even pick it up, right? Of the 100% of people that you might project your book to, maybe 10% is going to pick it up, 5% are going to read it, 2% are going to like it. So you have to come to know that rejection is going to massively outweigh success and praise. So to that end, right? So, this is an interesting book because I feel like I explore some very heavy elements, right? And so, yeah, on the one hand, I worry about portraying these people honestly and accurately, but the music industry has been really fascinating too, because one of the things that I did when I was getting ready to release it was start reaching out to people in the industry. Worked really, really hard on that. And I got some ins. I got a surprising amount of ins, right? With people that I didn't think I would be able to reach out to. And so I get the book to them, and essentially across the board, it was roundly rejected. And the reasoning was that, well, that's not how the music industry works at all. And then when I would kind of press in on that and ask questions, they would say some things. And then it became very obvious that they really hadn't read it, because a lot of things that they brought up were actually answered because I did a ton of research. Now, and I thought about this on the ride over here because I thought that you might bring up this conversation. I launched into this and started writing without anything more than a cursory knowledge of music. I know what I like, and I'd love to touch on that too. I know what I grew up with. I know what I like seeing on stage. But do I know what goes into making an album or going into a tour? No, I don't. And to take that amount of time and put it into a book, it's, soul sucking and whatever. So I don't call it hand waving because it's not, because, you got 394 pages, and you're trying to introduce an entire universe. So you can't really get into that. And we do get into that and answer a lot of the questions in Mirrors. But, I was often criticized about like the reality. Well, and the big thing was, well, they wouldn't have a contractual obligation that tight that they'd be running up on. Well, yeah, they would, and I explained why that would happen. So the music industry has been a lot more critical than anybody else has.
That's interesting, because as I'm listening to you talk, I think about how much the industry has changed and is ever changing. I am one that had a really hard time. I grew up buying cassettes first. I never really bought a record. We had records. Doobie Brothers was probably the China Girl was one of my favorite songs.
Absolute same.
It's like 1980. We have a record player in our living room, and I would just crank the stereo. I loved it. But I start buying. I think my first tape was like Phil Collins, one of his tapes.
Can't Dance, maybe?
No, it was his, Susu Studio, whatever that album was, or Beastie Boys, License to Ill and Run DMC. But and then, you get to CDs, and then you get into this whole thing where, like, in my mind, I liked albums, A-side, B-side. And now it's like, to me, I didn't think how they could figure out monetization. And now with Spotify and all these downloads, and we keep buying music over and over. We're like, it's not like, oh, I bought that tape, I bought that CD. No, I'm just going to keep buying it because I need it to play wherever it's going to play. And it doesn't matter if I already have it on an iPad or a phone or something. I probably will buy it again for whatever device, because I can't get access to it. And even in space a little bit. I don't want to like delve into like SpaceX, but you got Blue Origin, you got all these things where like your industry is ever, the competition for it is ever changing, right? So I think we've learned more and more that there's always disruption. That seems to be, look at what AI is doing just in the last year, and GPUs are a company like NVIDIA, which is totally different than what it started out. Or Netflix, totally different of what, and even Netflix, I can't remember what it was, something the headline the other day. I was like, I can't believe this. Like, they started out just mailing DVDs. And here it is. I can't remember who they were acquiring. They were acquiring some satellite company or something, maybe to improve their streaming and constellation pattern or something. But, it's always changing, so how dare someone say, well, the music industry, well, guess what? People are leaving California. You get Austin, Texas is, and Rogan and all them are in the comedy circuit, in Nashville. Post Malone's in Nashville now. Like, there's these hotbeds that are popping up, and I think the industry just continues to change in front of our eyes.
Yeah, so that was one of the things that, like, not to be critical, because I really respect the people in the industry that reached out, but that was actually like the thing that they missed, the idea that I was actually making. You just kind of nailed it, right? So you got a band, Aberdeen, that hits the height of their success in the CD era, right? So they find success, and we're gonna use the time frame of 2000. They have their their first breakout, and then 2003 they have it go platinum, and then they sign a 5-year deal. It's a huge deal, right? So we're still in the physical media age where albums matter, and what I mean by albums is, the album tells a story. The cover tells a story. All of these things matter. And so, but look what happens. Let's say that this happens in 2005 and they've got a 5-album, 15-year deal to do it. Okay. Now, what happened in the next 15 years? Exactly what you were just talking about. Physical media becomes a thing of the past, right? So it is, you can buy it, but it's secondhand, whatever. You can't go buy at the store. So it's no longer monetized for the artists, and maybe this digital age. And so a band like Aberdeen, who was at the height of their power at the end of one age and based their contracts on that age, once they moved to the digital age, well, albums don't matter anymore. We consume song by song. We don't even listen to whole album. I mean, I do and you do, right? But my kids don't do that. They build a playlist. Well, how in the world would a band like Aberdeen be successful under those contractual obligations in the modern era, which is ever changing? And it's funny because I started writing this book before AI was really a thing, and now look what it's become even in the last couple of years. And I got to be a man of the times and figure out how to, maybe incorporate that. Although, now the big thing is with, and it's changing in my world. So, when this book came out, it was it's already been successful by my metrics, but we're living in a current age. It's happening now in front of us where, times are hard. People are cutting subscriptions. Okay. So independent authors, one of their main, sources of income is Kindle Unlimited, right? Well, Kindle Unlimited is one of the first things that consumers are cutting. And buying books that cost $20 online or at Barnes & Noble, that's an easy cut. I picked the wrong time to do that. Furthermore, on the other end of the spectrum, AI, there are authors out there that are writing 2 books a week using AI, right? And that's not, I'm not going to do that. But they always say this, something else that I learned was your first book is not going to be a success financially. Your second book, probably not. But the more books you have to put out books that drive readers back to your other books. And then eventually that picks up. So I'm looking at this now and going, well, I can't compete with people that are using AI and just pumping out because, hey, it's all part of the algorithm. I got to get on Amazon's algorithm if I want my book to show up. And it's fascinating.
Yeah. Yeah, or you pick some very generic category. Like, hey, I'm the #1 bestseller.
Right.
Because you're the only one in, Russian ballet, I don't know.
Or you write, or you write a super niche book, right? That was another thing. We've been joking around at the house and with friends and family that, I love science fiction. I wanted to be a science fiction writer. I should have been writing fantasy or I should have been writing smut because these are the things that are being consumed at a rapid pace. And they're, no offense, but they're drivel for the most part.
Yeah. Let's talk about the color choices real quick. The purple and the green.
Yeah.
What's the significance of that on the cover of Rockstar Echoes?
So I hired a professional cover designer. And this is an interesting story because I'm, believe it or not artistically minded, and I'm not really a nostalgia person, right? So this cover started as she went out and she read the book multiple times, and she went out and found a bunch of stock pictures, and I can get to how that works if you're interested. And we down selected, and we down selected, and we down selected, and we down selected, and we got to, I think, 2. And I chose this one, even though everybody else wanted to choose the other picture. And I knew going into this that using this picture was going to be a gamble because people were going to read, you look at that, and once you read the book, you look at that cover, you know who that is. And that is like very direct, although, you're not supposed to really do that a ton, but even my cover designer said, yeah, I think this is the right decision because you're making a statement. Klein has 70% of the page time, but the 30% that Rain has is far heavier, and the series is going that way. So we selected that picture, and she came back with this design, and I didn't like it at first. I hated it. And I hated it. I didn't get it. And I didn't think about that, but I'm such a direct person. Like when I was thinking cover design, I was thinking like, I want a picture of like from behind Klein walking to a stage and you can see the fans, and the artist was, the artist that I worked with was like, no, we're not going to do that. Like, this is the direction we're going to go. So I'm in Nashville with my best friend, his wife, my other best friend, and my wife. We're going to see Incubus, and she sends me to send me essentially what was the finished copy. We toyed around with the font a little bit. We'll talk about that. And I didn't like it. And I showed it to my best friend, who is very much an artist. His name's Kevin Smith. We've been best friends since 3rd grade. We've lived together. We stay in touch, obviously. And he said, your artist nailed it. And I said, what are you talking about? And he was like, dude, these colors, and like, he started naming album covers. He said she did her research on 90s nostalgia. This coloration with the sepia, the photo itself, how she darkened it, because the original one was very colorful and lifelike and really focused. And I wanted to make the hair really, really red, and she went the other way and made it very brown sepia, right? But like the pink into the green, that was all her. And I've never really gone back and asked her where that came from, because I think I respect that. I think that for you to ask an artist to tell you why they did something kind of undoes the mystique of that. Does that make sense?
Yeah, that's right. It wasn't purple, it's pink.
Yeah.
Pink to green.
Right. And then like the font, like, so the echoes and I was like, oh man, it just looks a little cluttered. And Kevin looks at me and goes, this is the font from Bush's 16 Stone. And I was like, oh. And I'm not saying that it is, but that was the point. It made him think of a 90s album.
Yeah.
And then I forget what other albums he kicked off at me. You know, there's a little bit of an oranges tint in there, which reminds me of Alice in Chains' Dirt, whatever. But the point is that I gave a friend of whom I highly respect his artistic abilities and his thoughts, and he said, "This is it."
And so then your night changed that night in Nashville, where you're like, yeah, you're all jazzed up and like, yeah, man.
You know, and we're walking to the show, and like I'm kind of fumbling through it, and I'm like, I think this is a huge gamble, and I don't know I need to do it because this other cover was really it. Like, I get it. It just screams addiction and stress and grief and ambition and all these other things, which is why we're going to use it for Echoes. We already kind of know where we're going on that one. But I was like, I have to make people understand that this series is about rain.
Yeah.
And it's a gamble, but if it works, man, what a statement that's making. People will look back and say, dude, that was genius to go that route. It wasn't that you was a gotcha or whatever, but it was making a statement without making a statement.
Let's talk about addiction. Why, in your opinion, why are rock stars just kind of so plagued by this? You know, to the point where they die by suicide, you know, or the depression. Like, what happened? What has happened to these stars?
So one of the things that I started doing, you know, we talked a little bit about like trying to get things right with the music industry. And because I got a lot of pushback on that, I started doing a lot of research and listened to a lot of podcasts. In particular, there's some, you know, I've listened to a lot with Brandon Boyd in particular, and I'm listening to one with Billy Corgan.
Mm-hmm.
And they tackle this a good bit, right? So if we look at the period of time that I'm really referencing, Klein is
Smashing Pumpkins.
Smashing
right?
Pumpkins.
Yeah.
And so, you know, Klein is obviously a huge grunge fan. He is really a huge fan of the Four Pillars plus Stone Temple Pilots. And but if you look at that era in time, starting with Mother Love Bone and Andrew Wood dying from heroin overdose, and then you've got Lane Staley dying of heroin overdose. You have Kurt Cobain doesn't die from heroin, but played a major part. Scott Weiland died for overdose. Why is that? Which is, I know that's what you're asking. And my thought on this, having done a fair amount of research on those particular people, is this. Zach's opinion, because I don't think it's a fact. We can't ask them. But for Kurt, for Lane, for Chris, for Scott, what defines grunge music for me is we come out of glam and hair metal, where it is very macho, right? Even though they're cross-dressing or whatever, but it's very much me, I, chicks, sex, drugs, and rock and roll. And then grunge is completely different, because while it is about me, it's talking about the self-deprecation, and it's talking about the struggles. And it's the first time that I feel like artists were really willing to open themselves up and pour themselves out on a page to talk about those struggles. Now, that being said, and Kurt Cobain was pretty open about this, is that you do that. You talk about the deepest, darkest corners of the room and where you are in those moments, and you put that out, and it becomes a hit, and people celebrate it. So when you're on stage singing this song and pouring out your soul, and you're hearing people singing it back to you, they're celebrating your struggle.
Yeah. And
they famously talk about that. So I think that plays a big part. Billy Corgan says that a lot of it is that the heroin or the drug addiction in general is more of a trauma response mechanism, which if you look at historically at rock stars, trauma plays a big part. So I think that's at least part of it.
Mm-hmm. Or I wonder if it's, well, I don't know. It's not just stars in general, right? Like, it's got to be difficult to, I guess you're kind of the difficulty of acceptance, or, you know, you play a city, and, you know, maybe it's for those bands and those artists who like maybe don't want to have to sing a certain song over and over, mm-hmm. but yet that's what they want. They demand it, right?
Just the hits.
And I know that, and I think you know more than I do about Kurt Cobain, who didn't like Nevermind.
No, hated it.
Didn't like whatever. And then you gets into the whole label wants something, and
mm-hmm.
the band doesn't, right? Because it's all about making money. Where in the artist, you just want to do what you want to do, your art.
Mm-hmm.
You want to do what, you know, you're passionate about. You want to be able to go to a show and play all of these songs, and maybe the audience doesn't like them.
Yeah.
You know, and so.
I mean, look at MTV Unplugged for Nirvana, which is while it was one of the kind of last shows that Kurt Cobain ever did, it's considered one of the most powerful albums. And you can say the same thing about MTV Unplugged with Alice in Chains. But going back to Nirvana, he famously played essentially nothing but covers for that particular reason. And I kind of had not a revelation, but back to your question, right? So, one of the things, why is it that addiction and rock and roll, right? So yeah, we can say trauma, we can say that part of it. But for me, and what I explore through Klein is that there is a self-replicating wheel. Okay. So you have demands on you, which introduces stress, and you cope with stress through addiction, alcohol and drugs. That fuels creativeness and right, wrong, or indifferent. And for some people, that's psychedelics, right? So there's plenty of artists that famously like psychedelics. So, but whatever drug of choice it is, that fuels this artistic ability, and then beauty comes out of that, and then out of that beauty becomes acceptance, and then there becomes more pressure. And so in Klein's perspective, throughout this series, one of the things that he comes to the realization is that nobody gets off the wheel. The idea is to stay on the wheel as long as possible. And I feel like perhaps a lot of these artists probably go through that too. But, especially in the early 90s, I didn't think they understood that there was a wheel. I don't think they really truly understood what heroin was. Just kind of like you look at HIV and AIDS in the 80s and how that went from something that nobody knew to being an absolute death sentence within 18 months. Yeah. So,
Yeah, I mean, I've never been a drug addict. Right. I may have done some drugs, but there's something to be said for you're rewiring your brain, whatever, and you're entering a different space, and maybe that's the pressure that you're under, and the only time you can be creative and come up with the next title or the next riff or whatever is when you're on something.
It's the only time that I think that again, I've never done drugs of really any sort whatsoever, and I'm not an addict in the traditional sense. I am addicted to trying to find ways to be successful and express myself creatively. But, I think that it does release the pressure. I struggle to think that, there's some sort of like you go to this mysterious space, even though I know all artists, that's what they tell us. I do LSD or I do mushrooms or whatever, and I go somewhere. Of course, I've always asked, like, how did you remember that riff then afterwards, unless you were sitting in the studio and doing it? Yeah. But I do think there's something to be said for lack of inhibition, because for that moment, you're not thinking about that contractual obligation, perhaps. You're only thinking about what's in your hands at the time.
I hope you don't mind this reference, but I'm a huge golfer, and so Scotty Scheffler is this, Scotty? He had, I think it was last year at like the, when they were over at the British Open, and the press is talking to him, and he's like, here's the thing, man, if I win this week, I get to enjoy it for like 5 minutes. And then the next question is going to be, hey, are you going to win this, this coming week? And if you don't, why not? It's like, so what's the point? He's like, he basically was going on to say, I'm not defined by my golf. Like, there's many other things in my life, my family, my faith, et cetera, et cetera. But like, you feel for these guys where you win, you put all your heart and soul into winning, that week. And then say the next week you don't do so well. What's wrong with you? It's like, I'm trying, and then when you do, it's not good enough. It's just, you're on to the next thing and the next thing. And that has to be like very frustrating.
I think at any level, it's that way, right? So competitive bass fishing is the same way. Sure. I certainly don't fish this level, but the Elite Series and FLW or whatever, and like I was talking to a guy the other day. It turned out he knew some of my family from Tuscaloosa, and because he had said, well, I'm finishing up here, and the moment that I weigh in, I'm jumping the truck, I'm going to Oklahoma for one of the opens, and like it is when you get to the highest level of anything, it becomes the next day, the next day, the next day. I'm 100% correct on that.
Let's make sure we cover the other books. I want you to share your vision for where this is going. I think Mirrors is really going to be the next one, right? Is really just going to kind of, you would compare it to kind of Empire Strikes Back within the Star Wars franchise. Can you now talk about what your plan is for all the books and and you know, the foreshadowing and such from one to the next.
Yeah, I don't want to give a ton away because
Sure.
there's some absolutely. So, you know, if you've read Echoes, and again, I don't want to spoil it. Hopefully, there's going to be a lot of your listeners that go out and take a look at this. And you know, there's a huge plot twist at the end of Echoes, a revelation. And Mirrors begins with the realization of that. And I'm trying to be really vague about it.
Yeah.
So in this case, you know, so this is Klein. This book is about Klein joining Aberdeen and trying to get the gig. And okay, it's his first foray into writing music and making a hit, right? So, you know, Mirrors goes into, okay, just like what you were just talking about. Okay, that was a good song. Next one.
Yeah.
Next one. Next one. And what that does to him physically and mentally. And, you know, he and Rain don't share a whole lot of page time together in this, in Echoes. And so this is going to be really a crossing of paths. And then, and really about halfway through the book, it really tips on its side where Rain really becomes the focus of this. Rain and the Painted Queens, right? So we really get a lot more of their backstory and what their struggles are and why that is. And so, you know, I know I'm being super vague.
It's okay.
But, you know, I'm really excited about it because it's a much larger book. You know, I think Echoes comes in at a little under 8,500 words and Mirrors is currently at about 115,000. And, you know, with that additional content. So one of the things that I did differently with Mirrors was that, you know, I because I didn't understand the process of like using advanced readers or using beta readers and all this other stuff. I mean, I did have some people that read it and gave me some feedback. I did change some things on Echoes, but not saying that there's fluff because I think that there's value in fluff. A lot of editors will tell you, especially developmental editors, are like, if it doesn't bring a tremendous amount of value, then you leave it out. And I didn't believe in that, right? Because I wanted to talk about the songs that were playing in the background and I wanted to talk about this and that. And Mirrors really gets really stripped down to its core where, you're going to really start understanding how these characters think. So one of the big things that we're going to get. So Echoes begins in the prologue with the Kansas City show, but it ends. It doesn't tell you what happened. So Mirrors, the big thing that kind of is the midpoint of Mirrors is going to be, what happened? What happened in Kansas City? Why would Klein, the first big show of a career for the Lloyd Brandon send-off, what would make him walk off the set at like the moment that should define his life?
Yeah.
And then the rest of the book is what is the fallout from that?
It's awesome, man. I think it's amazing when you can write something or watch something and you're like, ooh, I wonder if there's going to be a sequel. There could be, but if there's not, I'm satisfied as well.
Yeah. Yeah. I think a lot of people, like, there has been, you know, again, I was, I think, very subtle with a lot of things in Echoes, and I think that's good writing, where you can hide the breadcrumbs in the plot in plain sight, and people miss it until the very end because that creates a rereadability. And I wanted to create a book that is made better by future books,
Gotcha.
right? And so and Mirrors is just the next book. It's not the final book, but you know. When you read Echoes, you're going to read Mirrors, you're going to remember things you read in Echoes, and you're like, oh, okay, that's what Clara meant, or that's why that statement mattered. That's why that person walked out of the room in that particular moment, and all those kind of things. And this is how he hid it in plain sight from me. So, and of course, that's just the first two books. You know, kind of had the same thing happen in the third book, right? Which I was going to call Final Show. Ambiguous ending, I know. That's the whole point, because this it started out as one book, and we went and we sent it to a beta reader, and she came back and said, "Zach, you got 2 books here, but you need to cut the fluff, and you need to add far more of the Queen's and Rain perspective, because I was, you know, like I said, when I wrote all of this, I only focus on one perspective." And so this is going to be called A-side and B-side. So you were talking about A-sides and B-sides, but it's more than just A-side and B-side. It's A-side, A-S-I-D-E, B-side, B-E-S-I-D-E, and that means something. It's very important, just like echoes in the way it's referenced in the book, or mirrors in the way it's referenced in the book. So very excited about that. And then, we already started writing some other ones. We have an origin story for Lloyd. Who was Lloyd? And that was another fascinating thing that a lot of people have said, was that we don't know anything about Lloyd other than he died in a mysterious accident. And once you get to the end of Echoes, you're going to know a little bit about who he was and what was going on behind the scenes. But we don't have anything other than, what the band mates say about him. So I wanted, when you get done with Echoes and Mirrors, you're going to have an opinion on Lloyd Brandon. It's probably not going to be a really good one. You're going to kind of say, what a jerk, And the ideal is that you go back and watch read Origins, and you read his story on why things happen in the way they did. It gives you a completely different perspective of this guy was just a human too.
When you say we, you talking about you and your wife, or who's the we on your team?
So I use we because, social media, my wife does all my social media. And I think you identify with how job. I mean, you're doing a lot more probably than I am on a day-to-day basis with this. But, you have to have a team. And if for no other reason, to have that person when you're not having great days, in terms of like sales and stuff, right? So, you go in these peaks and valleys, and right now it's very obvious that, for whatever reason, not making, haven't had great traction in the last 7 days. And I have to remind myself to quit looking at the numbers every day. That's not the point, right? So I need that person to not only help me with the social media aspect of it, but to also be that uplifting person that says, have faith in yourself, right? Have faith in yourself, trust your intuition, and certainly bounce ideas off of. And although she's probably sick of it, and my best friend's sick of it, and whatever else, but yeah, that's why it's a we.
Yeah. A couple things. One, it's like, I always say, I will say, this is my little, like it's easier to turn like a friend into a fan. No, it's easier to turn a fan into a friend than a friend into a fan, right? And so like I'll get frustrated at times when I see like other podcasts like get more comments and stuff, but then I also kind of realize, well, they're being just like when I first got started, you're gonna have some people who are like, "Hey man, good job, so great," and they're out, they're done. And then it's a matter of really trying to figure out who are my real fans, right? Or you have some friends that turn into fans. And I start to think like of all the, let's say I read a Stephen King book, and I'll read it, and I don't read. I'm just using an example, right? I don't read them. I listen to books, and it's not like I immediately send him a note saying that was a fantastic book. No, I might tell a few people it's really good, and then his next book comes out and you read it. And I kind of think like I'm hoping that like even like in my show, or maybe it's like the more people expect it to be good, then you're not going to hear much, because people are like beyond commenting and they like what they like. And maybe if they see you, hey man, I really enjoy your show. And I don't know, that's got to be a really tough thing. Like when maybe some people are like, hey, I can't wait for Zach's next book, but they're never going to comment because maybe they're tired from the responsibility of commenting every day anyway on stuff, right? Or they're not a keyboard warrior. And you know what I mean? Like we sometimes have this expectation that people are going to do that, but a lot of times it may not, because they just don't get around to it. But man, you really want the comments, right? Or you want some sort of feedback.
I want feedback. Again,
good, bad, or indifferent.
Yeah. So it's really funny that you say that because, my best sales tactic has been at events, right? Whether it's author events just for me, or if it's a market, or if it's the thing at the Orion. And you have good days and you have bad days, but one of the things that I've been really focusing on is what is my conversion rate, right? So I keep those numbers. And it's really funny because if I can get a person to my table and to actually talk about the book, it's a 70% conversion rate, which is insanely high, right?
That they buy it.
But then you run stuff on Amazon and whatever, and you're looking at cost per click and the conversion rate, and it's not happening. And one of the reasons that is that, you're talking about comments. For me, it's reviews.
Yeah, sure.
And, love my family, love my friends, but getting them to go leave a review, it was like pulling teeth. And so at these events, when I've been selling books, I've been hammering at them about right, wrong, or indifferent. I need you to go leave me a review on Goodreads. I need you to go leave me a review on Amazon. Even though you didn't buy it on Amazon, it'll still allow you to go leave a review. And even if it's a 1-star and you hate it and you think it's the worst book and you want to burn it or whatever, tell me, put it on there.
Yeah.
Because that one thing that we can't control is the algorithm, right? And that is the only way to trick the algorithm. And again, Amazon doesn't rank books in terms of the pages on the goodness of the book or how unique the interior layout is. Like, Echoes is with the black pages that have one word that describe an idea or an object, all these little things that I thought about. It doesn't care about that. It cares about one thing, sales and what's going to sell. Well, that has a whole algorithm with it. But yeah, I mean, it's so easy to get discouraged. And I know kind of exactly where you're coming from on that because yeah, you ask people, you ask your friends, was it a good book? Yeah, it was a good book. Okay. Well, what about it? What'd you like? What'd you not like? Hey, I'm trying to improve myself, right? I'm sure you do this every day, right? Yeah. So yeah, that's a struggle.
All right. I got some questions for you.
Okay.
And lately I, as the interview goes on, I'll write down questions rather than hitting you to say, hey, what's your favorite color and whatever. All right. So this happens to me more often. I love music, but then I also didn't listen to every, song on every album. Mm-hmm. And I was thinking it was a Traveling Wilburys when Tom Petty, or was it a Tom Petty album when he's like, this is the end of the record, or now it's time to turn it to the other side. Mm-hmm. I don't know if that was Traveling Wilburys or if that was one of his own, but
I think it was a Heartbreakers.
Was it?
Yeah, I think pretty sure.
What was the last song that you discovered or rediscovered that surprised you?
So this is fantastic segue because you brought up Candlebox earlier.
Oh yeah.
Okay, so I hated Candlebox back in the day because of the song You and then So Far Behind. Okay. I just didn't like them because I liked Alice in Chains, Soundgarden, blah, 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 blah. And I have a theory on that. So I disregarded Candlebox entirely. And as I was doing some research, I started listening to some stuff, making myself listen to some stuff that I didn't particularly like or hadn't experienced before. And a lot of this is because writing Klein and his struggle, creating his character. I'll get back to this. And there's a song on their album called He Calls Home. And
he has the real deep voice, right? Or am I confusing with Crash Test Dummies?
No, he does not have a deep voice. Okay. He's got an incredibly tall range.
Okay.
But it's this song about running into a homeless guy and wondering what his family is doing and why he's there, and does he realize his family loves him and why doesn't he just go home? And then transitioning into, well, I have a family that I'm have left. Why don't I just go home? I don't want to go home. And then as the song goes on, it's just as heartbreaking as he comes to the realization of let me come home. And I was actually writing Echoes at the time, I think, or Mirrors, and that's how I was listening to new music. Let's get some different vibes going. Let's create, what does Klein sound like with Aberdeen? What does Klein sound like? What do the Queens sound like? What does Klein with the Queens sound like? I was trying to create an identity for them. And I knew I had to listen to different bands for that. But man, that song just was like, whoa. And so I wrote a scene in Echoes, and I don't know if you recall this, where Klein is, before he leaves for LA, he drives to the corner station to get some more beer. And he walks inside, and there's a homeless man, and he asks him for money, and Klein says, I don't have any cash. What do you want? The guy's like, I just need cash to go home, whatever. And he goes, if you want beer, say you want beer. The guy says, I want beer. So Klein goes inside the store and he buys a case of beer and he sits down next to him and they discuss this dude's life. And he's saying why are you doing this to yourself? What brought you to this? And he said, the guy who has a shopping cart, that's all he has in his world. He says, I was just born to push away. And he was being direct. The guy was talking about I was born to push this cart. And Klein gets in his car and realizes there's this profound statement of this man pushing away everything as he pushes a cart, and how Klein himself had pushed everything away from himself. Man, I just gave you a long answer, but that was a song that was just like, whoa.
Yeah, that's awesome. You made me think of, the song Mr. Wendell in Tennessee. I'm trying to remember the band. There was the song Tennessee. It's I can't remember. I can't believe I'm drawing a blank. But one day we're like in English class in my senior year, and people like had to do a report on something. And this guy, Cheyenne Nahora, a friend of mine from Iran, he talked about Mr. Wendell and kind of the same thing, kind of a homeless guy. And it was like very impactful. Like we had a moment as a class, and one of those, everyone was just listening to Tennessee, which was on the radio and really popular. And like he brought up this other one, and like, man, it was just like I've never like appreciated. It's like kind of maybe one of the first times I really kind of started to appreciate lyrics more and the meaning and just the whole context of stuff. But it's really neat. Well, I'll have to listen to the Candlebox.
Yeah, and what was another thing that was profound about that was one of the things that Clara says in Echoes is like that Klein, he only knew 4 bands. He was a huge fan, well, 5, right? So the 4 pillars of grunge plus Stone Temple Pilots. And so I realized like, why would how hard it would be for him to develop a different sound if he had such a narrow view? And why would he have such a narrow view? Well, if he lived in North Alabama in the 90s, the only alternative station that you could get was 102.9 out of Nashville on a cloudy day, which I understand. And so his experience would be small. And the reason I came up with that was because that was my life. I started asking myself, why didn't you like Candlebox? Well, because I only heard a couple of songs from them. And I listened to more and more music. Mother Love Bone is something that I listened a ton to. And Temple of the Dog was one that writing Echoes, 100%, there was so much Temple of the Dog being played. But like that was a really important part of his development going from one book to the next was like how Klein developed as an artist over time, just as I wrote this book, listened to more music over time, and it made me a better writer.
Yeah. Awesome answer. All right. So as a fisherman, tell me the best fish that got away.
Ooh, well, you do this long enough, there's going to be a lot of those. So Neely Henry's on my mind, right? So we just fished there for Alabama Bass Trail. As usual, you ask me a question for one thing, and I'm going to give you more. But there were a couple of years ago, we were fishing Neely Henry, and we had found a spot way upriver, and we knew like we're going to get there first. We're going to get first crack at these fish. And all we got to do is put them in the boat. And we knew we were not going to get a lot of bites that day because it's tough. Neely Henry is just not a fun lake, to be honest with you. We had the worst tournament we've had ever this weekend. So we run up there, and we knew it was going to be quick. And we're flipping. What flipping is close quarters combat, basically, with fish, right? So you're right up on top of the fish, and you're flipping in just 2 feet in front of you into weeds, like really thick stuff. And you're throwing big gauge line and stuff. And like when they bite, dude, you're just jerking them.
Yeah.
And Josh, being on the front of the boat, got kind of first pick at all the fish. You don't see them. You're just kind of flipping in all the holes in the grass. And the first 4 swings he made of the day, he broke the first 2 off, and we saw him, big fish. And one of them he jerked completely over the boat, and it came unbuttoned on the other side. And one he jerked, and it hit the trolling motor and came off in the first 15 minutes. And we're like, that was 12 pounds right there. And we knew to win was going to be about 18. So like that would have been a start. And then later on that morning, same spot. The sun's gotten up a little bit. I'm throwing a topwater frog, right? And there's a boat coming towards us. And Josh and I are nice guys. And we had every right to say, y'all just came into this cove. We've been in this cove. We're fishing towards you. You're fishing towards us. We have rights. And there's rules against how close you can fish. But we decided to be nice. And I noticed that this boat is throwing the same exact bait that I am, and they're fishing towards the same stretch of grass that I'm about to fish, and they caught the big fish of the tournament. And it was the only fish they caught that day. So you put the 4 fish that Josh missed, and you put the one that I didn't get to catch, and you win $10,000 right there.
Right.
So it was a tough day.
Jeez. What kind of fish are they?
These would have been largemouth bass.
Largemouth.
Yeah.
And that one they caught was?
It was over 6 pounds.
Okay.
It would have put us at 18 pounds and 5 fish in the first 30 minutes of the day.
And 5, you can't, is a limit 5?
That's right.
Okay. Tell me about it's one thing to build a custom house, custom boat. Do you like to be on the water? Mm-hmm. Could be a simple fishing boat, whatever. Like, what's your dream boat that you'd like to own?
That's a good question. I having owned a bunch of boats, I'm going to give you an answer that probably most people tell you that have owned boats is that I wish I'd never owned a boat, right? The best boat is the one somebody else owns, right? Yeah. Or the one you just sold. It's always the
best 2 days of the day you bought it and the day you sell it, right?
Hole in the water, which you throw.
So you don't think about that much?
No, I don't. But I'm fortunate because my best friend has a boat, and I have multiple different fishing partners. I've owned a lot of boats. But man, they're a hassle. I honestly don't like fishing by myself a ton, and so I would rather spend time with my friends, and they like using their boats. So I haven't really kept up with the new boat market. I've owned Skeeters, I've owned Stratuses, I've owned Bullets. They all have pros and cons. When I was a younger man, I loved Bullets because you could go really fast and beat everybody to where you wanted to. And as I got older, speed doesn't matter to me anymore. Comfort does, being able to take the waves and all that kind of stuff. So, I've been fishing out of a Ranger for a long time. But hey, my favorite boat is like you said, it's the one you just sold, or your best friend's boat.
I want to join, I want these boat clubs to come here so you can just, whatever your monthly subscription is, and you get access to a boat once a week or whatever your plan is.
Well, I made a decision a couple of years ago. I was going to get another boat, but I'm also a big car guy.
Yeah.
And I was really missing the enjoyment. I stress a lot about things, and it's because it's growing up. My grandfather took me camping all across this country, and he took me fishing all across the country. But there was one thing that always happened. That was something breaking. Something always broke.
Oh yeah.
And he was, he's still alive, and he's having some trouble right now. He's 96.
Wow.
I went and spent some time with him yesterday. It was fantastic. But, it gave me trauma. It gives me trauma to this day, right? So anything that's expensive that you own is probably going to break down on you. And I don't like boats because just, it's hard. But like cars, I wanted something. I decided, I was like, I would rather have something that I can drive and doesn't give me a lot of stress. So I decided to buy a ZL1 Camaro instead of buying a boat. And then I don't even drive it hardly very much, but I do enjoy it.
What year is it?
It's a 13.
13.
So, those things, man, it's sports cars are just not what they, back in 2000 to 2002, you could buy a Camaro brand new SS for under 30 grand. And, we've had a bunch of those, and they'd be 2 years old and they're half price, 15. Well, a ZL1 still commanding, even a 13, which is 13 years old, that's still 35 or 40 grand.
Wow.
Yeah. Their hold value.
The Dukes of Hazzard had a huge impact on me because I saw it live, right? We would wait for it every Friday night at 8:00. Actually, I talked with Christy Finley about that a couple of episodes ago. But muscle cars, there's a is it a Chevy Galaxy? Who makes the Galaxy? There's one Ford Galaxy. It's like for sale right now. And it's like a 1968. It's just cool looking. I'm like, man,
the Galaxy 500s are, oh man,
I'm like,
gorgeous.
Maybe I should buy it. Even if and my brother, it's in his DNA because my dad was a master mechanic. He could rebuild any engine and all that. But I don't know. There's just something I love about I love the 69 Charger, 68 Charger, of course, but just that era that, gosh, it's 60 years old now, but man, they're so cool looking. Just to put a real cool paint job on it, even if I just looked at it.
Yeah.
Start it up every now and then.
It's amazing to me when not everything, inflation is an incredible thing, but you look back in that era on a high schooler with a summer job could afford to buy that kind of car. And they did, right? There's a reason why. You look in an old picture of a high school, and you had your Chevelles, your Camaros, your Mustangs, and, and all the Dodges that made great, and Pontiacs. And it's insane. I'm right there with you, but I ain't got that kind of money.
Yeah. I don't know if I did a ton of research on the Dukes of Hazzard around 2000 because I just really loved the show and I was trying to learn more about it. And if you owned a 69 Charger and you lived in LA, if you went into the store, you could come out and either someone from Warner Brothers was there or they leave a note we will buy your car for double or triple so we can total it.
Yep.
Because they totaled 330 cars.
Yeah, they single-handedly made that a rare car. And it's so funny because having owned, even though my Camaro is 13 years old, what's so interesting is we have this it's not really recency bias. It's history bias. We think of just how bad those cars were and how, powerful and whatever. But dude, my Camaro makes 580 horsepower from the factory versus like, it would blow those cars completely out of the water.
True.
So,
all right. If you were to write a sports book, which athlete would you want to, I guess, like kind of a biography? If you were to do a biography on an athlete,
would it have? I mean, does it have to be based? Obviously, it would be based in fact, right?
I mean, could be. Yeah, I mean, at least a kind of a real figure, even if I guess you went the fiction route, but based on a true story.
Well, I mean, my first intuition is to write one on Bo Jackson. Obviously, being an Auburn fan, and I did my master's at Auburn and stuff, and like I was the other night watching one of those highlights, the one where he throws out the dude from the field, and dude's at first base, and he's one of the fastest players in the league. And it's one of the things I loved about that video was like, I had not heard this explained before, but the umpire was completely out of position because he didn't think it was possible. But anyway, point being, like, I think I would take that and maybe do like what the 70s cartoons did, where they were like, whether it was like Scooby-Doo or whatever, and they'd have like an athlete come in and do that. So maybe I would make it like a fictional, like, I don't know, maybe like a Flash Gordon thing, except maybe with Bo Jackson, where, he's really a superhero, because he was a superhero.
Yeah. I think he's the best athlete of all time.
He is. I mean, that's not even bias. I don't think anybody can even, like, there's no real argument for that. You know what I mean? Like, what he was doing was insane.
About the year you were born, All-Star game, him and Wade Boggs, he hits a home run. I think it was the first pitch.
Lead off. First time it ever happened.
Boom. And hits a home run, and then Wade Boggs comes up, hits a home run right after him. But that was just amazing. It's like, yeah, Deion Sanders played baseball, and Jordan tried, but Bo Jackson was an all-star.
Mm-hmm. And do you think, like, let's just be fictional with it? Maybe the book, we could write a book together, right? And maybe in the book, Bo Jackson decides that I'm going, because remember, Bo knows, right? And him, and Gretzky's like, I could play. What if we write a book where Bo went back in time and at his prime, and he actually did try out the sports, and he competes against Michael Jordan, and he competes against Gretzky, and what would happen? And we could be, he wouldn't win, right? I mean,
good athlete though,
but he could hang, right?
And now he's all into archery.
Yep,
so that's his thing. All right, what's your favorite? Let me preface by saying, like, I'll just geek out. Even I've been watching the Counting Crows documentary, but the one that really sticks out is when, like, the Chili Peppers, and how Anthony Kiedis wasn't even the singer, and then because Flea is his best friend and he's in the band, and they're like, I guess they were playing some bar frequently, and then I guess they lost their singer. Or something.
They were in another band.
They were another band.
So the Chili Peppers were actually, so it wasn't George Clinton yet. It was a designer. He did videos. He suggested, he heard Kiedis rap. And he said, I think next Saturday, y'all should just get together and do a song at this venue as a side project. So Chili Peppers were actually a side project.
That's right. But then when Rick Rubin suggested, like, Under the Bridge, he was like, they listened to the album he had, which was Blood Sugar Sex Magic. And he's like, you need one more song. And like, well, we don't have any more songs. He's like, well, do you got like a book? Do you write stuff down? And Anthony got out his like book where he just he's like, well, this is like this poem. He's like, read it to me. And he's like, there you go. He's like, but it's not a song. Like, make it a song. And that's going to be your song. It's like incredible. So for you, what's one of the most amazing band stories, if you will, or, kind of something like that, when you go back and you learn the true story of it and you're like, man, that is just completely remarkable?
Certainly one that comes to mind from recently is the Jeff Buckley documentary, because I had no idea who he was, right? And he never made it. In terms, he did make it. He was widely respected by all the artists surrounding him. But by the time his big solo album came out, he had drowned. And so it's really it's a sad story. Number one, to learn about like his struggles of being a dude that could write lyrics like nobody had ever heard, and how other people, borrowed those lyrics, and like, but he struggled in his personal relationships. He could put on the page anything he wanted, but he couldn't live it. And it was heartbreaking. And then at the time where all these other artists are self-destructing by their own hand, Buckley drowns in the Mississippi River, like wasn't drunk, wasn't high, had, a barge goes by, he gets an undertow and he drowns, and they find him 3 days later. But like learning about his impact, I think was really fascinating. And so that's a documentary that comes to mind. But I think one of the most impactful things for me was the story of Mother Love Bone, right? So because Apple came out posthumously, and certainly came out in 89 or 90. I didn't get to I was late to the grunge scene, to be honest with you, because again, I talked about this in my work that like we can only consume what's put in front of us. My parents, we lived in rural North Alabama. We didn't have an alternative station. We barely had a classic radio. I didn't have, my parents didn't give me money to go buy albums. There was no album stores, right? So my experience with music is completely different than people live in the cities. And you talk to people like they knew every band. So Mother Love Bone is one of those that like, you learn about their influence, even though you never heard them on the radio. But then you're like, okay, so that's where Pearl Jam came from, and then the influence that had on Temple of the Dog making their record, and Mad Season with Lane Staley, and like that influence of that band just cannot be overstated. And it was an album that I literally I'd listened to Chloe Dancer and Crown of Thorns, of course, but I had never actually listened to any of their other stuff until I started writing again, making myself consume stuff that I hadn't heard. I don't like Andrew Wood's voice. It's very high pitched and it's just not for me. But like they had such a massive influence. It's really the Nirvana brought grunge to the world, but Mother Love Bone created grunge.
Gotcha. Thanks for that. I have to look that up. I don't know much about Mother Love Bone. But I did get to go to one of the early Lollapaloozas. I saw Green Day when they were young, and I saw Courtney. It was actually the year after Kurt Cobain, but Courtney Love was there.
Yep.
With I can't remember which band she was with.
Probably, I'm sure she was with Whole. I was actually just listening to Billy Corgan's podcast with Courtney Love, which is hilarious if you get to listen to it because two things. First of all, they say, if you're trying to become successful with anything in the music industry, and this applies, the number one way of getting Billy Corgan's attention is to talk about him and criticize him. Oh, really? So maybe both of us will get really famous by me saying this, but he doesn't let anybody finish a sentence. It's always his voice. Interesting. But then you put Courtney Love and him together, and it was like I finally had to turn it off because I was like, they're not getting anywhere, even though they've known each other their whole lives. So
I think he's a weird looking dude.
But. He is, and again, another guy that a voice that is like, and he admits this. He knows singing was not his forte. Yeah. But as a musician and artist, he's unparalleled, and everybody agrees upon that. I just happen to not like him. So Billy Corgan, if you're listening, you can go on your podcast.
All right, last if these books turn into a movie or something, which actress plays Rain? If it's like I liked Reese Witherspoon in like Walk the Line because I like it when sometimes actors will actually sing, or even Joaquin Phoenix did a good job. Yeah, it's Johnny Cash, but like which actress, whether she's a singer or not,
right,
plays Rain?
So Anya Taylor-Joy was the first one that came to mind, and obviously the red hair plays part, even though anybody can wear a wig. But Rain is such a unique beauty, right? She's not the definition of what anybody would consider classically beauty, way she's shaped or with her sharp features and things like that. So, Riley Keough was an obvious answer that's up there, although she's already, that's Elvis's granddaughter. And she did Daisy Jones and the Six. And I just was like, I'm not, that would be it was lazy, but like I figure I wanted, I would want actors that could perform, like you said. So Rain, of course, is just one part of that puzzle. I'd have to put together a group of people that look the part, play the part. And, my favorite one, going back to my favorite character, was Ava, and I wanted Mackenzie Davis to play Ava. Which, if you don't know her, she was in like the last Terminator movie. She was in Station 11, which great show. If you've not watched it, it's based on a book. Just her dry wit and physical presence. She has the look. I was really looking forward to that.
Okay. That's all I got, man. Those are the questions I wrote down.
All right.
Hopefully they're a little different and interesting, but do you have any final thoughts or shout outs? We've like absolutely crushed your personal record of doing a podcast.
Yeah.
For well over 2 hours.
And I felt like we probably could have, we
keep going, right?
Kept going, right? Yeah, for sure. But that's the good news is that, we can do this again.
We will.
So, maybe when you get done with the book, and certainly, whenever you want to talk NASA stuff, I love talking that because, my opinion, although NASA's doing a lot better about it now with the social media and getting people involved, and certainly Artemis 2 did a fantastic job of making the American people aware of what we're doing. We don't self-promote very well. And that's kind of one of my personal missions is to, whether it's a custodian at our work or somebody off the street, is to talk about why NASA matters and why human space flight matters. And I don't mean just like the influence on Huntsville, but in our life. But no, in terms of shout outs, what time is it? 8:19. So my wife's probably already in bed, so I love you. Hopefully I don't embarrass her too much. I always talk too much. Now that I'm sure you know that, and say something that she's going to be like, okay, next time, don't say that one thing.
Well, there probably won't be many next times where you get to do in person for 2 hours, right?
No.
But I really appreciate your time.
No, thank you
and
for having me.
I apologize we had some, I'm not traveling this week, but I literally travel like a lot and it just messes me up.
Yeah.
I look forward to weeks like this where I'm like, okay, I'm home and I can process and
get back in your element,
run errands and think about things. But I really appreciate it. And all the best.
Thank you.
And yeah, thank you. And we'll see you next time.
All right.
Thanks,
you,
Zach.
everybody.
Take care.